The Komati coal-fired power station is eerily quiet. It's one of the oldest in South Africa and the first one to be decommissioned, part of the government's plan to use less fossil fuels. Most workers were let go in 2022.
With everything now that it's happening, it's like they are focusing more on the environment while they don't care about the people who are starving and everything. So these things, they need to be balanced so that it goes together.
The government says its Just Energy Transition program is training people in other skills. Community leaders insist very few here are earning a living.
Obviously, the government knew at some stage the power station had to be shut because of their lifespan. But there was no succession plan put in place to ensure that once the power station is stopped, life sustenance continues or economic value chain continues.
Transitioning to renewable energy won't be easy. Africa's most developed economy has an energy crisis. It still needs its coal. South Africa generates most of its electricity from coal. It secured international loans to help with the transition to green sources. But analysts warn switching from coal to renewable energy could take decades. While South Africa is not the world's biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, there is international pressure on all countries to reduce the use of fossil fuels.
I think whatever happens, we are going to see some sort of a growth or a move from coal towards renewables. I think it will partly also happen because many of these coal plants are old and they have been breaking down quite often. Keeping them going is going to probably cost more than building something new. So I think that economic realities also come in, but it's going to be a slower process than a lot of people would like.
More coal power stations are scheduled to be decommissioned in the coming years. That will mean more job losses in all sectors along the coal belt. Haru, Mutasa, Jazeera, Komati, South Africa.
Well, let's bring in Chris Yelland. He's the managing director at the energy consultancy EE Business Intelligence. He joins us now from Johannesburg. Chris, so South Africa isn't just the world's largest greenhouse gas point source emitter, it's also the largest emitter on the African continent. I know environmental groups have been fighting for this for years, but it has come at a political cost, particularly for the ANC. I see Ramaphosa is actually now trying to renegotiate the timeline for the closure of these plants, but that could also affect something like $2.5 billion in financing?
Well, that's right. There are plans afoot to delay the shutdown of a number of generation units at 3 power plants in South Africa until 2030. Now, these were scheduled to be shut down earlier, but my sense is that they are going to shut down, at 2030, but that the plant will not be completely decommissioned. In other words, the units that are shut down will remain available as standby plant in case of emergency or necessity. And the reality is that security of supply is critical, not only for the economy, but politically. And so these units will not, in my view, be completely decommissioned, but kept available for, in case of emergency. But beyond 2030, I think there has to be and will be a scheduled shutdown of a number of further power plants. And this means that they have to be replaced by new power generation sources that are cleaner and greener and less carbon CO2 emitting, and use less water than coal-fired power plants. So I think we've seen the end of new coal-fired power plant in South Africa.
Well, it was interesting to see. It was just yesterday that South Africa's new energy minister vowed to accelerate that shift to renewable energy from coal. That's obviously a huge break from the past. How is that playing out more broadly when you look not only at the infrastructure that exists, but at how this is being discussed within the community?
The reality is the Minister of Electricity indicated yesterday that he would aggressively move to the rollout of renewable energy in the form of wind, solar PV, battery energy storage, and pumped water storage. And I think that is the right approach. South Africa is going to need about 60,000 megawatts of new renewable energy by about 2032. 2034. So there is going to have to be a very aggressive rollout. But as I said earlier, I think they will keep those units are coal units that have shut down, keep them in case of emergencies.
Chris, I see a huge chunk of the push that we've been hearing from the Energy Minister has been for nuclear, which has been discussed for many years, hugely contentious in South Africa. Is that part of the idea, then, to perhaps retrain some of these workers from coal to create jobs in other sectors?
You see, the reality of nuclear power in South Africa is it's going to take probably 3 or 4 years to clear the regulatory and planning hurdles, and then a further at least 10 years to do the construction. So when it comes to new nuclear power, I don't think we're talking about anything coming to the grid before 2035. Now, by 2035, there's going to be 60 gigawatts of variable renewable energy on the grid. And I don't think that 2,500 megawatts of steady baseload power in the face of 60,000 megawatts of variable renewable energy is the right solution. What we need is flexible generation, and nuclear is anything but flexible. So I think the realities will start to creep in. It is being talked about. It's highly controversial, but I think the can will be kicked down the road further because it is not a solution to our immediate needs.
Well, Chris, let me ask you then about how to deal with the jobs question that so many people raised when they spoke to our reporter, Haru. I mean, obviously, this is not just jobs in the coal-fired power plants themselves, but also downstream jobs in terms of mining. This is a huge, huge industry. South Africa is not alone in trying to move towards renewables. So how do you address this in a responsible way, especially when it comes to worker welfare?
Now, the first thing I want to mention is that the loss of jobs in the coal mining sector is nothing new and has got nothing to do with renewable energy. The jobs in the coal mining sector have been declining for a decade and have got everything to do with automation and mechanization and the move from underground coal mining, which is highly labor intensive, to open cast surface mining, which is highly mechanized and automated. So this job losses is taking place. It has been taking place for a decade. It's going to continue to take place. Renewable energy is not playing a big part in these job losses at the moment. They could play a bigger part going forward, but I think everybody accepts and realizes that there is going to be an energy transition. The important thing is to try and make it a just transition and not to leave stranded communities which become a political and an economic and a social wound in the side of South Africa for years to come. So efforts need to be put in for training and moving of jobs. It's not an easy process, and I think the transition is going to be messy and unfair. But the reality is that this is a global trend that is not something that we can just buck the trend.
Chris Yelland there, the Managing Director of energy consultancy EE Business Intelligence. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us on Al Jazeera, sir.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.